Morning, second grade class. If you remember, we have been discussing national holidays, national celebrations. Well, today we are going to be discussing Thanksgiving. We are going to read this book, Thanksgiving on Plymouth Plantation, and we're going to find out why we celebrate the holiday Thanksgiving. Before we begin reading this book, let's go over some vocabulary to refresh our memories. So the first word we have is pilgrims. Pilgrims is one who journeys in foreign lands. Settlement is a place where people establish a community. And Mayflower. If you remember Mayflower, we have looked at pictures, we have watched a few videos. It was an English ship that brought pilgrims from Plymouth to America. So we have discussed if you have been on a ship, if you have had an experience out to sea. So now we are going to read Thanksgiving on Plymouth Plantation by Diane Stanley, illustrated by Holly Berry. So why do you think Thanksgiving is celebrated? Think about what your traditions are with your family. Do you go somewhere? Do you stay home? Do you eat lunch, dinner? So by looking at the cover, what do you think is different from this Thanksgiving and the Thanksgiving that we celebrate today? Turn to your neighbor and share your thoughts. Okay, Thanksgiving on Plymouth Plantation. We're going to look at Thanksgiving then and Thanksgiving now. Remember how we just shared with our neighbor how we thought Thanksgivings would be different? Let's look and see how they are different. So Thanksgiving then, a few items were sea bass, ducks, boiled eels, beets, venison, which is deer meat, Jerusalem artichokes. And Thanksgiving now, we have our turkey with stuffing, which they called pudding back in the day, turnips, apple pie, cranberry sauce, boiled onions instead of boiled eels. So as we read, we will compare and contrast this Thanksgiving with the Thanksgiving that we celebrate today. So were your thoughts correct? Every year we go to visit our grandmother for Thanksgiving. You're probably saying, so what? Lots of people do that. And you're right, lots of people do. But you see, visiting our grandmother is not like visiting your grandmother. Our grandmother takes us traveling, and we don't mean to the Grand Canyon or the Empire State Building. She takes us traveling through time. Out west on the Oregon Trail or up to Boston for a tea party. I'll bet your grandmother doesn't do that. Hi, Grandma. Welcome, welcome. Hi, Moose. Mom and Dad decided to drive out into the country to get some apple cider at Whipple's Orchard. They asked if we wanted to come along. We said we'd rather stay home with Grandma. Then as soon as they pulled out of the driveway, we begged Grandma to take us somewhere. My turn, I want to visit her. Why, Liz, what a great choice. That's Remember Allerton. She was your grandpa's great, well, I forgot exactly how many greats it was, aunt. She was one of the pilgrims who came over on the Mayflower. Remember? What a weird name. That's nothing. I know a dog named Sparkplug. When you travel back in time, you have to put on the kind of clothes that people wore back then. If you don't, they'll think you're really strange. I have to wear 3 layers? I'll bake. Trust me, Lenny, you'll be happy to have them. No central heating, you know. Hey, I thought pilgrims always wore black suits and big hats with buckles on them. Nope, they dress like ordinary working people of their time, and they like to wear colors, same as anybody else. Of course, on Sundays, they put on their best suits and fancy collars. As soon as we were dressed, Grandma put on her magic hat, and we all held hands and closed our eyes. She told us to take a deep breath. Then all of a sudden, everything felt different. There was a cool breeze and the air smelled woodsy. I see the word woodsy. Let's close our eyes for a second and take a deep breath. Think about what you smell. From the illustrations, I can see that there are some trees and there are leaves, and you can tell that they are outside. Woodsy means the smell of wood or the smell of outside. Plymouth Plantation, here we come, where we get to meet our forefathers and our foremothers and our four dogs. So we're in Massachusetts, right? Northern Virginia, actually. Virginia, you're kidding. No, dear. See this big area from modern North Carolina all the way up to Maine? Well, back in 1621, the English called all of it Virginia, but the northern part of Virginia they called New England. The first people we met there were two boys. They ran into the woods, laughing like they had just played a big joke on somebody. And were they ever surprised to see us? After all, the nearest English settlement was at Jamestown, Virginia, hundreds of miles to the south. Grandma made up a story about how we had sailed up from Jamestown and our ship had sprung a leak. So can we stay here in Plymouth for a while? Of course, Governor Bradford will welcome you. We could use your help with the harvest. Why do they call themselves pilgrims anyways? They don't, Lenny. They call themselves planters because they came here to build or plant a new colony. Many years later, people started calling them pilgrims since they traveled all this way because of their religion. That's what the word pilgrim means, you know. So let's look at the word harvest. What do you think it means? Think in your head about what you think the word harvest means or if you have ever heard it. So harvest means gathering of crops. And as we continue to read along in our book, you will see that they are going to be planting crops and that they are going to collect them. Let's also look at the word planters. If we go and read right after the word planters, it says they call themselves planters because they came here to build or plant a new colony. And that sentence gives us exactly what planters means. So planters are people who came here to build or plant a new colony, and they are also known as pilgrims, which we discussed previously. Governor Bradford was surprised to see us too, but he invited us to stay there and share what little they had. He said that since it was harvest time, they could really use our help. When Grandma said we were distantly related to the Allerton family, he said we should stay with them. Come, I'll take you to see Isaac Allerton. He will be glad of a woman's help at home, I know. His wife Mary died this winter and he has 3 children to look after. Of course, I'd be happy to help. If this is harvest time, does that mean we get to go to the first Thanksgiving? Well, sort of. You'll see. Have you seen John and Francis Billington? Those tickle-headed fellows? Not since this morning. A lot of people lived with Mr. Allerton. There was Isaac Allerton and his 3 children, Bartholomew, Remember, and little Mary. But some of them weren't relatives at all. They were people whose families had died or who had come to America alone. The house was just one big room with a fireplace at one end. That's where they did their cooking. It was dark inside because the windows were small and they didn't even have glass in them, just paper soaked in linseed oil. The floor was made of packed down dirt. There weren't enough chairs for everybody, so we sat down on whatever was handy. Yikes! It's cold in here, and ouch! Something just bit me. Sorry, dear. Could be flies, could be lice. You've got to be kidding. Gosh, Bartholomew, why did you come here anyway? So we could practice our religion freely. Back in England, it was against the law to have our own separate church, you know. They could put us in jail for it, so we escaped to Holland. But it was too hard to make a living there. Now we're starting over again, and it's a lot of work. But we will own land and build a good life here. Most of us slept on mattresses on the floor. How long have you been here? About a year. We left England in July, expecting to arrive by summer's end. We wanted to get our houses built before winter set in. But our other ship, the Speedwell, which is just like the Mayflower, kept leaking and we had to turn back twice for repairs. We finally sold the Speedwell. Some of her passengers crowded onto the Mayflower with us. The rest will come later. When we finally left, it was September. We were beset by terrible storms and didn't arrive until November. By then it was bitterly cold. We didn't even start building our common house until late December. Not a very fun Christmas, huh? Members of their church don't celebrate Christmas, dear. In fact, they worked on Christmas Day. Warm. Nobody had pajamas. They just wore their long shirts and curled up under bed rugs. So think in your head, can you imagine having no pajamas when it was cold outside? All they had was long shirts and they cuddled under bed rugs, which is like a blanket. We got up early the next morning and everybody had a job to do. We went down to the spring to fetch water. Others brought in wood for the fire, or fed the chickens, or milked the goat, or picked sally herbs, that's vegetables, from the garden. Grandma helped make breakfast, but don't imagine pancakes and bacon. It was mostly leftovers, which they called relics. Goose broth and goat's milk cheese and porridge made from Indian corn. What time does school start? We don't have school, but we hope to bring a schoolmaster over from England soon. For now, Papa is teaching us to read whenever he has the time. Even Mary is learning, aren't you, Mary? Yes. We have to learn how to read so we can study the Bible. Hi there, did you come over on the Mayflower too? Yep, and I was seasick the whole time. It's a pity we have no beer for you. We ran out nearly a year ago, but you need not fear the water. It is very wholesome here. Pilgrim kids drank beer for breakfast? Back in England, their water was very polluted and wasn't safe to drink. Beer was actually healthier. It seemed like everything we did had to do with food. As soon as breakfast was over, the women got busy cooking the main meal of the day, which was served at noon. The rest of us went out to collect food. In the fields, we gathered corn, then brought it back to the house, where we hung it up until it was needed to grind into cornmeal. Yow! That's a lot of salt. Why are you doing that? Salt dries out the fish and preserves it so it will last through the winter. This is weird looking corn. It's all different colors. It's Indian corn, child. It grows much better here than our English grains, and it will feed us through the winter. We picked barley and, of course, lots of pompions. Can you guess what those were? Pumpkins. Other people went out hunting, or fishing, or gathering clams and mussels and eels. We met a man called Squanto, a Wampanoag of the Patuxent village. He spoke very good English because he used to live in London. When he was a boy, some English sailors kidnapped him and made him a slave. But Squanto escaped and finally got back home. When he arrived, he found his village deserted. Many of his people had died from a terrible disease, maybe smallpox, caught from European fishermen. This is Squanto. Oh, what a sad story. What happened then? I lived in another village for a time, but since the English came, I have lived near them. They were in great need of my help, since they know little of our land and less of our language. His name is actually Tisquantum, but I guess the English couldn't quite pronounce it. And indeed, he has been a true friend to us. He taught us how to grow corn by digging holes, dropping a few fish inside, then planting the corn on top. That gives the corn something to feed upon as it grows. But we had to keep an armed watch on the fields at night, so the wolves wouldn't dig up the fish and spoil our crop. Let's look at this illustration. They are dropping the fish into the ground and then they are planting corn on top of the fish. When we learned about plants, how do they grow? Do we put fish in the ground and does that make plants grow? Think in your head why you think that they put the fish in the ground in order for the corn to grow. On Sunday, we didn't work at all. That was the Lord's Day. As soon as we heard the drum beating, boom, boom, we knew it was time for church. We met at the house of Captain Miles Standish, the military leader of the colony. Then we lined up by threes and marched to church. Everybody in town was expected to go, even if they weren't church members. And the service lasted all morning. Then after lunch, which they called dinner, we went back for 3 more hours. Which one's the minister? We don't have one yet. Until we do, Master Brewster acts as our religious leader. He's our ruling elder, you see. You know who he is, dear. He's Love and Wrestling Brewster's father. Yeah, I was wondering about them. I mean, Love is a pretty weird name, especially for a boy. But at least it's kind of nice. But why would anyone name their kid Wrestling? I believe it's short for Wrestling with the Devil. I take it back, that definitely beats Sparkplug. The Puritans didn't have anything in their worship service that wasn't mentioned in the Bible. So there weren't any prayer books or hymns. There wasn't an altar with candles. There wasn't any heat either. So some people brought little foot warmers filled with burning coals. We kids sat with the women and were expected to keep quiet. The only time we got to open our mouths was to sing psalms and say, Amen. This doesn't look like a church. It looks more like a storeroom. It is a storeroom, but the building isn't important. It is the people who are the church. Children, hush! Cozy. At last, the harvest was all gathered in, and it was time to celebrate. So the men went off hunting and fishing and came back with enough food to last us all for a week. The women worked just as hard, chopping and mixing, boiling and frying. They made stews, which they called pottages, roasted meat on spits over the fire, and stuffed puddings into the bellies of the turkeys. Puddings? That's stuffing for you. So right here we can see a difference that we talked about at the beginning before we read this book, that then they called stuffing or dressing, they called it puddings. Here we call it stuffing. Lenny, what happened? Where are your shoes? Johnny Billington told me how Squanto can tread eels out of the mud, and I thought it sounded fun, so I tried it. Only he didn't say to take my shoes off first, and now they're totally ruined. Don't worry, we brought a good supply of shoes from England when we came. I'm sure we can find a pair that fits you. The guest of honor was Massasoit, a sachem or chief of the Wampanoag people. He arrived with about 90 men, and they stayed and ate with us for 3 days. Some of the men who came with Massasoit went hunting and brought back 5 deer as gifts for the most important colonist. Even with such a big crowd, there was plenty of food. Look, there he is, the king of the Indians. We have a treaty with Massasoit, you know, signed last spring. We agreed to help them if they are attacked, and they promised to do the same for us. Massasoit isn't actually his name, it's his title. It means great leader. His real name is Usamaquin, which means yellow father in Wampanoag. This is Massasoit. Of course, nobody had a table big enough to seat 140 people. So we ate all over the place. The important men like Governor Bradford and Captain Standish and Massasoit sat at the head table and had the best food. The rest of us ate inside or outside, at tables or on the ground. It was kind of like a big potluck supper. We helped set the tables and serve the food and clear the dishes away. That's what children and unmarried young people were expected to do. I don't understand. Why did John and William and Edward and George have to do so much work while the other men just sit there? Why? Because they're servants, Liz. I'm hungry. When do we get to eat? We get what's left on the table. I get what falls under the table. So thinking and looking back at a word on our word wall. Let's read. It was kind of like a big potluck supper. What is another word that we have discussed that could mean a big supper or lunch? I see the word feast up on our word wall. We have talked about feast previously, and that can be used here. Let's look at the illustrations and see their feast. So you see that some people are eating outside, some people are sitting on the ground and at tables, and there are other people who are sitting at the tables and they are eating inside, and they are all having a feast. Nobody ate with forks in those days. They used knives to slice off bits of meat, and they had spoons. But mostly they just ate with their hands. It's a good thing they had those huge napkins. The plates were called trenchers, and most of them were made of wood. What's the matter? Don't you like your stewed eel? I think I'd rather have turkey. Just think, here we are at the first Thanksgiving. This isn't a Thanksgiving, Liz. It's a harvest festival, like the ones we had back in England. A day of Thanksgiving is a religious holiday when we spend the day in church. Bartholomew is right. The people of Plymouth won't have a true day of Thanksgiving until July 1623, when a good rain arrives and ends a long drought that had threatened their crops. What do you think would happen if there was not enough rain for the crops? Would there be a harvest and then a feast? Turn to your neighbor and discuss what you think. After dinner, we played games like stool ball and pitching the bar. We had races and wrestling matches. When Lenny and I do that at home, Mom gets mad. And I'll bet you thought the Pilgrims never had fun. While we were busy playing games, the men exercised their arms. That doesn't mean they did push-ups. It means they shot at targets with their muskets. Finally, Massasoit and his men thanked us for a nice party and went home to their village. We took down the tables and washed the tablecloths, and everybody got back to life as usual. They had been through a hard first year and had another hard winter ahead. Look! A ship! It could be French pirates. We'd better go tell Captain Standish. Not to worry, it's the Fortune bringing more colonists to Plymouth. Wow, and the houses are so crowded already. Maybe it's time for us to go. So here you can see the ship, which is like the Mayflower. This is called the Fortune. And it's bringing more colonists to Plymouth. So here we can use the word voyage. What do you think the word voyage means? Voyage means a long journey involving travel by sea. Remember when we discussed the Mayflower and we asked our neighbors if they had ever been on a cruise or a boat or a ship? This is what they are doing here, and they are on a voyage. The Mayflower went on a voyage to bring pilgrims over, just like the Fortune did here in our book. We hated to say goodbye to our new friends, especially Remember and Bartholomew, but we had to go home and help Grandma cook Thanksgiving dinner. So you see, our ship should be repaired by now. We had best be going before the winter storm set in. I wish you safe passage. We'll miss you. We'll miss you too. Bye! So Grandma put on her magic hat, and faster than you can say Happy Thanksgiving, we were back at Grandma's house. A few minutes after that, Mom and Dad came home with a bag of apples and 2 gallons of cider. You should have come with us. It was great. A real New England experience. That's okay, Dad. We kind of had one of our own. My favorite, Grandma, turkey with pudding in the belly. Pass the Sally herbs, please. If you two clean your trenchers, there's Pompey and pie for dessert. What on earth are you talking about? Lenny, where did you get those shoes? So now that we have read Thanksgiving on Plymouth Plantation, turn to your neighbor and discuss, what do you think the significance of Thanksgiving is? Not yet. Also, discuss with your neighbor if your predictions were correct about Thanksgiving then and Thanksgiving now. After you have a few moments to discuss with your neighbor, we are going to see if you have any questions, and we are going to listen to the classmates' predictions and answer those questions.